Hello everyone, and welcome back to Young People in Politics. Following on from our previous two episodes, I sat down with Rob O'Donnell, International Liaison Officer and Acting Chairperson for the Young Greens, to talk all things CETA and the future of the Youth Wing. If there's anything particularly interesting you heard in this show, or would like to just get in contact with us to voice your opinion, you can do so by commenting below or emailing us at johnson.business.yt@gmail.com. With that out of the way, please sit back, relax and enjoy. Brilliant. All right. Well, Rob, thanks a million for joining me anyways. As a representative of the Young Greens, CETA has been a fairly contentious issue for most parties, but particularly yours, given it was such a huge part of the last general election and a big contentious issue, especially amongst the Young Greens too. I first of all want to start off by asking, obviously, the Young Greens haven't made an official statement regarding CETA to date. However, they have retweeted two tweets, one being from the Just Transition Green statement surrounding the agreement, which sort of welcome further scrutiny on the bill, and in particular the investor court system. And the other one was from Councillor Laura Donaghy, praising the work of particular Green Party TDs, councillors and the Stop CETA Ireland for working to push the ratification of CETA back. So based on this, are we to assume that the Young Greens are against CETA?
Yes, but there hasn't been an official vote or anything on it. And maybe if I could just go quite quickly into that, why that hasn't happened. I think it's no lie that there have been quite a lot of resignations from the Green Party in general, and particularly from younger members. It's a real shame, and I mean, you're free to question me on that as well. But yeah, the Young Greens, during particularly the first big CETA debates, when it was first announced that it was going to be on the Dáil agenda, we had decided to take 2 months away from political activity, mostly because of, I think, exhaustion of the members who were left, and to be honest, a lot of frustration with the government at the time. We've since regrouped and we're having an upcoming EGM, so hopefully there is some bit of a rebuild here. I'm hoping for it anyways. But yeah, that's why there hasn't been anything official. But I think that my sense of, obviously my personal opinion, but also my sense of younger members, particularly those involved with the Young Greens, is we would be quite against it. And the Green Party has been, and it's been pointed out to us, hey, we were campaigning on 2016 against CETA, and particularly the investor courts system being implemented. And I mean, as a Green Party and as a Green movement, we're not super for these massive trade deals. It doesn't really fit in with the Green movement. What benefit does a massive trade deal, including absolutely everything from pharmacy products to cheese from a region that over in Canada, for example, or literally everything, to just be given the free trade status, when, to be honest, I mean, it would be an awful lot more environmentally friendly and beneficial for farmers here in Ireland if we made that exact same cheese here, because it just makes sense. Certain things I'd be more kind of in favor, and I think that's kind of general consensus among Green parties across the world, that certain sectors should maybe have trade agreements because it makes sense. Medicines and things like that. Looking back to the kind of the green pillars, which include equality, access, and free trade agreements can be kind of good in that sense. But yeah, that's why I think a lot of Green Party members have been against it and are still against it right now. And that's where the split and the people like the TDs who have spoken out against it are justified, and a lot of the councillors as well, and some that you mentioned there. So yeah, sorry, very long-winded explanation of why we are where we are at the moment.
Obviously, a lot of the parties would voice opposition to the agreement based on the controversial investor court system. And I think from a Greens perspective, a lot of the time that seems to be brought up in the fact that if a country decided to implement stricter climate regulations, companies might see this as a threat to their profits and might be able to then further use that court system in order to abuse the state in that way for large sums of money. But however, we saw back in last September, obviously on Morning Ireland, Eamon Ryan was discussing how that the CETA refers to the Paris Agreement. So any attempt sort of to use the investor court system in that way couldn't be used to strike down government actions that maybe seek to implement that said agreement. What is sort of the Young Greens' take on that perception of it? Because obviously Eamon Ryan at the time before the general election was very much adamantly against CETA and was attending it, many rallies and protests against it, but seems to be almost a U-turn in this term. What is your sort of opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's well documented that the Greens back in 2016, when we had two TDs, like the two TDs that we had, Eamon Ryan and Catherine Martin, were out with protesters about this. There has been a lot of changes introduced. CETA itself is effectively an action apart from the ICS part of it. And there has been some updates to this. I don't know the specific details of them. They've been said to me, and it makes sense that there were some improvements on it, but it's not absolutely certain. And it's interesting for me to see, because there are some very qualified people who are still adamant and would say the opposite of what Eamon Ryan said there. And this is why it is very important that the scrutiny goes into this bill. And back in December, we were not happy that it was just being brought forward, and it is good that it has gone to certain committees. But to be honest, my main concern with this, the investor court system coming into play, is the effect that it might have on future legislation. Mm-hmm. People don't, it's natural to not want to set yourself up for failure in the future, and we don't want to put forward maybe new legislation in a few years' time because we might get sued by Canadian multinationals that are moving over here. I think it's important as well to note that like Canadian trade is quite, it's low. It's down in the single percentages and the low as a percentage of what we deal with. It's increased slightly since CETA was really kind of enacted. I don't have the official figures here now, but when you look at where trade is and what sectors, it's a lot in medical devices, it's a lot in pharmacy, and there'll be quite a lot of large Canadian corporations here and who have entered the market in areas like health and housing. And to be honest, I don't say, for example, the state went on a massive public housing and, looking at the Vienna model across the country. Could a massive multinational company who owns thousands of units in Ireland in the future, because we see a lot of this happening, could they potentially sue the state for this? Yes, they could. And that, I feel like, is at the back of the mind of legislators, or it will be. And that's probably the real lasting damage that might come from this. And we need to make sure that there is absolutely no chance of that happening, that future legislators aren't going to be tied to this, or they're not going to be scared to do bold policies, because my personal political ambitions are we need bold policies. We need a complete rethink of health and housing, and the old way of doing it and just slight tweaks to it aren't working. And I think that's quite clear as well from the electorate based on the last election. And unfortunately, we haven't really gotten that in this government, but that's another story. But yeah, that's, I think, where the real lasting damage is going to be from this, because we cannot come out of it. There's, clauses of this lasting for years and years and years beyond what, even if, it was taken back. So we really need to scrutinize this and make sure it is foolproof, that we're not signing up to something that we're going to regret. And that is what I think is why it's important that it goes to committee. But not just tokenistically as well, that we really need to listen to the experts here and people who know what they're talking about. So yeah, sorry, once again, very long-winded. I tend to remember that.
No worries. But do you genuinely think, though, that like an agreement between, especially an economic agreement between Canada and the European Union, is going to affect domestic housing policy in Ireland to a great extent?
This is the thing. It's not just about like will it. Who knows? There have been cases, particularly I think on the climate aspect of the licenses for drilling and things like that, and the cases have been brought forward to ICS or its equivalent across the world where it exists. Because ICS investor court systems have existed for quite a long time, and in certain cases, like they're fine where there's a disagreement over ships in unclaimed waters, or that's not the correct term, but fishing in areas where they maybe shouldn't be. Like, they exist for this thing because, of course, if I'm fishing off the coast of China and I go to the national court there, of course they're going to rule against me, even though it's a contested area. So these kind of things, it makes sense. But in this area, I'm going to just reiterate the point. It's not just about what might happen. We don't know. But it's about what we might be scaring off people who are going to be legislating in the future. And I think that's the big thing that's very hard to test, but it's probably the thing that's going to have a bigger lasting effect here.
Mm-hmm. That's fair enough, I suppose, at a certain point. But when you look at these agreements, a lot of the time there's a lot of compromise that especially has to be done, and particularly on the EU's part, because you've got 27 member states that all have to agree on this particular decision. And people might point to the economic benefits that this agreement has already had with Ireland. I think each year 1.35 billion worth of goods is exported from Canada to Ireland and vice versa. You know, what is it that I say this as the Young Greens, but also asking as a broader term of what is the Green Party sort of proposing to offer instead for these sort of businesses that have had, an economic uptake since this agreement has kind of gradually been brought in?
Yeah, I actually had the figures, and I don't have the tab open now, but like it is a small enough amount. We're not going to cripple any industries in the same way, that like Brexit would have had a massive effect if the trade agreement wasn't set up properly. Canada is a smaller trading partner. I mean, it's not to say that particularly it might be very specified in certain sectors and they would feel the damage to this, but I mean, it has existed the whole time. And it's the free trade aspect of it is existing already. I've already said what I think about mega trade agreements, but I don't think there's going to be a full pullback on this. It's just the ICS is the real potentially damaging thing here and the thing that needs further scrutiny. So yeah, that's it.
So to kind of gauge that a little bit more, you're kind of in favor of a lot of the economic aspects. It's more the ICS that's the big drawback for you, is it?
I mean, I'm accepting of the economic aspects of it. I think if I wouldn't have, we've brought in CETA, TTIP was an utter mess. The debate's still ongoing around it. Like Mercosur coming up again. Like the potential impacts of them are all the same. Like there's massive pushback against Mercosur because it is going to have a massive impact on our farming industry here because they're completely undercut. And I don't think it's not good for the environment. It's not good for local farmers. It's not good for farmers here. It's not good for indigenous communities in South America. Like there's no real reason for this. And the same thing can be said for all other trade agreements. Like there's pros and cons. But I'm conscious that we're not going to take back CETA. We're not going to take back the free trade agreements that exist between countries in the EU. It's just it is the way it is, unfortunately. And there are some good aspects to them, of course. Certain sectors, health, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about the sort of the pushback this has come from the senior party and kind of the drama that has almost ensued from it now. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it was a huge talking point of the previous election where CETA was, even during the time with the programme for government, it was a highly contentious issue as to whether it was going to be on the cards. And, the Green Party at the time, I think, were assured that CETA wasn't in the programme for government, so it would be an open vote in that sense. And sort of it seems to have changed and been manipulated into a certain sense that it's no longer that. I've seen a lot of, varying TDs, councillors voicing their disagreement with Eamon Ryan and the cabinet's dealing of CETA. Is there sort of a similar split occurring in the Young Greens at the current time and point, or has that already happened?
I mean, it's hard for me to kind of judge, but it's clear that the Young Greens we took some time off as an organisation, and I mean, I have to say, like, engagement is nowhere near where it was a year ago. So it's hard for me to kind of measure that. I think generally, though, and this is very generally because, of course, there's individuals, and this is one very important thing about the Greens. We do encourage open debate. It's not just toe the party line, wherever. But people are generally kind of on the more left side of the Green Party. I think Green parties are inherently left, anyways. When you look at their policy, I suppose in Ireland we can maybe look at our implementation, having only been in government twice with right-wing parties, but. Yeah, we generally would be quite similar to maybe the Just Transition Greens, as you mentioned earlier, and Green parties across Europe, in that sense. So yeah.
And with that being said, then, has there been, I know you mentioned that the party has taken a bit of time off and whatnot, but even, I suppose, prior to that and even a bit more now, has there been a continued contact with maybe senior party figures surrounding the issue behind the scenes? Because, obviously we haven't seen a lot in the open from an outsider's perspective. Can you kind of give us maybe an insight into how that's been going?
I'd actually say the opposite. I think all the dirty laundry has been aired on this within the Greens. There were motions brought to Policy Council to do various things on this. When it was first being proposed, this was in December. The date was pushed back into the new year, initially February. It still hasn't been brought before the dawn, and then it was then pushed onto committee, which I think was probably a bit of a compromise on all sides. Look, this is something which I still struggle with. As a young Green who joined, around the time of the Green Wave, and as did a lot of other people, and a lot of these people have since left because they're not happy with the direction the party is going, and that's totally valid. I can understand it. I suppose governing is hard. It does, and that's not a good excuse, I don't think, for every crappy decision that has been made. I'm trying to say the right thing without getting myself in trouble here. There would be a lot of people within the Green Party who know, okay, look, we've gotten quite a lot of good things in this programme for government. I don't deny that. We definitely do. This government is better with the Greens in it, because without us, there would probably be a whole rake of independents who would, parish pump the politics out of this country, and I don't think that would be very good for the country. So it is 100% is better, and they are willing to take these people who believe this, that we are better in there, and that the country is better with us in there. They're more comfortable with voting against the things that we as Greens fundamentally disagree with. That can be quite hard to stomach, and I don't envy the TDs and senators who are in that position. I suppose for myself, I was an election candidate, but I wasn't elected, so it's very easy for me to criticise and say what I'm thinking, because there's no repercussions. It's the same for a lot of councillors as well. They really need to think, what side am I on here? And this is the same thing happening with every single debate that is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael policy, because they are the bigger partners in this coalition, but it is against the Greens. And unfortunately, we keep losing people as these things go on. It is very, very tough, and it's very demotivating, and that's why we did have a lot of issues within the Young Greens. But I still do think that as activists, and those that are still in the Young Greens, our kind of a feeling is that, well, look, there is space here for us to be heard, for our energy to be well spent, and maybe get some good things out of this government, even if we fundamentally disagree with on a lot of things. And that's kind of where we are. I don't know, will I say the same thing in a year's time? There's definitely some rebuilding and trust to be gotten back from younger members. And I think the whole Green movement, I think we got very lucky as a party that we had a Green Wave, which was led by non-party activists. But also at the same time, I do think that the Green Party is always going to be the Green party in people's eyes, as in the party that at its core looks after the environment and is about climate action. So yeah, it's complicated, it's difficult. I have my ups and downs as a member. I think I'm fairly okay at the moment. Talk to me in a few weeks, I could be, cursing about things that are happening and totally disagreeing with them. But that's tolerated within the Green Party, and that's it, really.
I think I just want to kind of touch on a note, because one of the things was with the previous Young Greens committee was that they felt that they weren't being listened to a lot of the time, that the senior party was kind of brushing them to the side. And I think we're kind of starting to see that on more of a senior level now. A lot of the councillors don't feel like they identify with even the cabinet or the junior ministers from the Green Party in this case. I think the most recent example of that has to be Hazel Chu running for the Shannon and not being, backed by the Green Party, or at least by certain members. I know Catherine Martin has said that she's going to back Hazel Chu. Do you think that this is a growing problem in the Greens, that they need to address this sort of divide at one point or another? Is it laziness on Eamon Ryan's part to not reach out to them and try and see what's going on, or is it kind of, both sides are to blame?
I think it comes back to that issue I just raised there about, like, some people are gritting their teeth and are willing to take the crap that comes with being in government with two right-wing parties, and others are not. I need to be careful what I say again, so I don't get myself started. I do sit on the executive committee as well of the party as the acting chair of the Young Greens, so I would be privy, to a lot of things that are happening. But I mean, I support Hazel Chu in her run, and I think it's a shame that all of this is being aired in public. And I would hope she does well in the Shannon election, and I hope she is elevated to national politics, if not now, in the future. Your question about the party leader, I mean, look, it comes back to that as well, and I think it's probably a lose-lose for him. If he stands up to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael more often, we lose the goodwill from them on certain things, and particularly in the middle of the climate action bill. I mean, this is the core reason for the Greens existing. We're literally legislating and mandating that over the next 10 years and the 20 years afterwards that we have to reduce our emissions. And if the Green Party experiences a wipeout at the next election, at least that is there. And I think grassroots movements will keep them accountable, and other parties. So this is unfortunate timing on that, and I think it comes back to that. Look, there's priorities here. I do want to clarify though, because I think there's been a lot of misinformation around this whole Shannon campaign. Hazel Chu, there was a decision not to have a selection convention for various reasons, and these are all have been leaked to the media. It was due to time, it was due to people just not wanting to nominate a senator. It was for various reasons. There was also a vote taking place to block anybody from running, and that didn't pass. So she's perfectly within Green Party rules and procedures and constitutionally allowed to do this. And I don't like. There's been some comments made that she's gone totally against it, and that's not true. And I have supported her on her run as well. I think it's important, particularly given the year that she has had. It's more important than ever to elevate the voices of those who are not currently represented in the Oireachtas.
Of course. I want to touch on one point you said, which was about maybe sort of the cabinet are in a dodgy enough position where, on one hand, they can't support Hazel Chu because they would lose sort of the goodwill they have with the government. But the question I kind of want to throw to you is, like, what has the goodwill gotten them so far? Because it doesn't seem to be doing very much for them. Most people nowadays, and this may be isolated to the group of people that maybe I talk to surrounding this, would kind of say, well, since the Greens have gone into government, there's been maybe a couple of bike lanes introduced here and there, but a lot of the time it's been voting against housing proposals, paying student nurses, and a plethora of other things. Like, where does the line draw for the Green Party with the concessions they're going to make?
Yeah, I think the goodwill, I'm not privy to this information. Sometimes it can be very difficult for me to see as well, and I get very frustrated at like, what the hell are we doing this for? I suppose it would have been very interesting to let Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael bring together their own programme for government and then compare the one that the Greens got through with them. Like, I can see a lot of our policy clearly being in there. I think we got a lot in because, to be honest, it's hard to argue. I think it's hard to argue against a lot of Green Party policy. It's evidence-based, it's quite progressive, and it puts the environmentalism, sustainability, people, power equality all at its core. And I mean, that's the stuff that is good and is easily adopted by other parties, and that's also why I think the Green Party has been effective both in opposition as well. It's bringing other people on side. So yeah, it's a question that's difficult to answer. What would it be like without us? But I suppose as well, like on CETA, moving CETA from that initial debate in December, I presume that took a lot of bargaining on behalf of, between the party leaders and between the parties in government. I don't think that's really noted or appreciated. And it doesn't make up for the fact that we have to vote against all of these motions coming through. I do want to note though as well, I found it very frustrating for the first few months until I kind of understood. I would have a lot of time for TDs like Nasa Harrigan and Patrick Costello and Francis Duffy and Catherine Martin in particular. And it was, a bit upsetting to see, although NASA did go a bit rogue at the start and voted against on certain things, and voted like with the opposition on certain things. She then started towing the party line, and she clarified that. She's like, well, look, I can't change this with my one vote, and I will be cast out from the party, and I could probably do more being inside. So she just doesn't vote for bills that are promoted by the opposition. And I think like it's politically very savvy to bring up all the dirty laundry or the things that we need to that we've always been standing up for, greyhounds, LNG, like all of these things that we campaigned on, and to see us voting against, I mean, it's politically awful. It looks terrible, but I think it's more understandable that like that's why some Green TDs are voting in favour of these things when they fundamentally disagree with them. And there's no excuse for student nurses. At the end of the day, I know a lot of people voted Green, much more than in previous years. People voted for me as well, and I told them what I thought, and I would be. It would be hard for me to run again, I have to say, and go back to knocking the doors where I told people like, yeah, health and housing are my priority, and it needs a green shield or a green kind of visor above it all. But it is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael policy, which is, I think, holding back this government. And the Greens have made it somewhat better by being in government. And that's just the reality of the situation that we're in. Like the vast majority of members did vote to go into government. And it took me a long time to come to this position. I know other members who are still here might have similar opinions, and other members have since left because they can't stomach it, and that's so fair and it's very valid. But yeah, this is the situation that we're in, and the Greens are a little bit messy because of all of these reasons.
I asked this next question in very much full knowledge that I am going to make the assumption that COVID-19 had a huge role to play in the reason why this government exists in the first place. I think anyone, even from Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, can agree that the only reason they went into coalition was, well, I would argue there's 2 points. One, because of the implementation of a Sinn Féin possible government, and the other one would have been because of COVID. Do you think that possibly if this was, and I suppose this is a big if COVID didn't come along, and the government, the Greens were to say, well, if we don't get what we want, we're dropping out of this government tomorrow, would there be more to be said for them dropping out of government? And because by all accounts, the Sinn Féin's numbers seem to be on the rise. Fianna Fáil seems to be tanking at the moment. There's probably the biggest opportunity for a left-wing government. Would the Greens, at least in your opinion, and I know I'm asking you to speak on a very big if, but would it be more of a sense that they could get more out of, say, stepping back from the government and allowing another election to be held?
Yeah, I think for the reps who were in there and the program for government they got passed, they want to get the stuff done in it. They need the 5 years. I get very upset about, particularly health in this government. Like if there's ever a wake-up call this country needs, like it was COVID, and health, the minister hasn't been super well, he's a different party, so I can say what I like. He hasn't been very good on certain aspects, and it's been a bit of a mess. And I think there's the public buy-in is just gone. I see it. Like I'm living in Dublin now, and like level 5 what? It's just not happening. And there's various other things that I think are not okay on this. Sorry, I'm rambling again. What was your question? So I can.
Do you think that maybe the Greens, if it wasn't
pulling the plug? Yeah. I think, to be honest, my feeling is that when a minority party goes into government, you inevitably lose seats, you lose support. It's exacerbated by bills coming forward from the opposition that we have to vote against because we're a part of the government, and and that's totally fair. At the end of the day, we're accountable to the voter. so I think, for a lot of TDs and, where we took the 5th seat and the 5th seater, like, it just makes sense to stay for the entire thing, and try get our aspects inputted. Like, and if people disagree with that, that's totally fair. I don't like to think that we're enabling a very crappy government, but you noted as well there that, like, we could have our first left-wing government. I would love that. This was always my thing, but unfortunately, I think even the polls are showing we might just fall a little bit short. Like, that independents, they tend to be right-wing, they tend to be parish pump. I don't think they would have a place in a Sinn Féin, Stop Dem, Labour, Green, PBP government. And, like, even now the numbers aren't there. Sinn Féin are on the rise, but they're sucking the votes also from left-wing parties. They're definitely not taking it from Fine Gael voters, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm going to try and maybe bring the topic back to where we initially started, which was CETA. And I kind of want to ask one question. Obviously back in February, I think it was over Sinn Féin put out this sort of, and I wouldn't want to say call to arms in a sense, but they've put out this tweet kind of trying to gauge where other political parties stood on this agreement and wanted to sort of bring together a cross-party approach, to prevent the ratification of CETA. Amongst all those parties, the Young Greens were one of them. Have you had much interaction with Sinn Féin surrounding this, or other youth wings for that matter?
No, but I think that's come from our own inactivity, to be honest. Like, there was a reach out, and we were like, for the committee members that were left, we were like, 100%. And to be honest, I kind of would like to see this going forward. I have a lot of respect for any kind of young person who gets involved in a political party. I think we need more people. I work in youth work, and, like, I think there's a fantastic generation of climate activists in particular, so they're like 15 to 20-ish now, and I hope they all run for the locals and they just take over. But obviously I would have more, like, political things to agree with the left-wing parties, Labour Youth, over Sinn Féin, the youth wing of the Sock Dens. I don't know, do they have an official name? But, like, yeah, I would love to see them take on environmental green policies, because it just makes a lot of sense. I'll happily defend the ones that they might not agree with. I don't like carbon tax, and that's not Green Party policy. So, that's the one that gets thrown at us all the time. The carbon tax policy that's there at the moment is actually a Fine Gael one. So, yeah, 100%. I would love to see more cooperation on this, because at the end of the day, I got involved in politics with, I suppose, a noble sense. It was very naive, that, we can make a positive change. It's quite clear, maybe if I was a savvier politician, I wouldn't be in the Green Party, I'd jump ship. But, we need environmentalism and Green Party policy and the Green movement to become a part of other parties' policies, particularly ones that are going to be going into government, Sinn Féin. So, Sinn Féin, please steal out of our policy and implement it if we are not super strong in the next government. And definitely we'll chat to you, if ever elected, about going into a coalition, because I think it has to happen, and it has to be adopted by all the other political parties.
I'll finish on one final question now, and it's a broad enough question, and I think it kind of encapsulates everything we've talked about this evening. Obviously we talked a bit about the Green Party and the Young Greens as a whole, kind of, starting afresh, I would kind of assume, is the role at this stage. But what is, in your personal opinion, what is the future of both the Young Greens and the Green Party?
Right. Like, this is all a personal opinion, and it's all what ifs. I don't know. I'm sorry. That's the simple answer. I don't know. I mean, there's always going to be a green movement. I still think, we might get. I don't think we'll keep all of our seats or expand on it. I think that's very naive to think so. It's kind of survival mode now. I just hope that we're not damaging the green movement by, voting against paying nurses, this kind of stuff. And we inevitably are, unfortunately. But look, I think the repercussions and the legacy of the Greens being in government right now will probably be appreciated later down the line. I hope it will. Moving to a carbon neutral economy, or reducing, even in the shorter term, 50% of our emissions in the next 10 years, that is the catalyst for massive change, you know, better agricultural practices, better investment in public transport. We actually have to do it now. It's not like, oh, will I put the Western Rail corridor in here, or will I reopen the Ross airline? No, like we need all of it. And money is never been cheaper. And when you have these potential, not only financial penalties, but like legal implications to not following it, well, like that's all the more motivation for whatever governments are in place in the future. So like, yeah, I think there will be a future for the Green Party. Hopefully, I mean, 2011 was bad and they still clung on, even if it was very, very small. I think as well as a much higher awareness of environmental and green issues, and the rest of it's politics. How do we play it? What candidates do we attract? Does it resonate with people? I was always one for talking about the daily stuff and not so much the environmental things, but you know, sneaking that in and showing this. And that comes down to who we get elected next time round. So yeah, it's going to be a tough few years, I think. I'll probably immigrate anyway, so it'll be a nice little break for me that isn't that's amicable. And on the Young Greens, I think it's important that, particularly while we're in government, that there is youth voice there. And I have to say, you noted there that like a lot of Young Greens in the past had noticed that they weren't relisted. That was very true, absolutely. Since then, there have been some meetings with the parliamentary party, so all of the TDs and the senators, and some one-on-one meetings with the ministers. We already met Roger O'Gorman. I mean, he's Department of Children and Youth. Like, it makes a lot of sense for us to meet them. And also Catherine Martin has been quite open as well, and it's in the calendar, plus other TDs, I have to say. So it's worthwhile us being here, because, you know, without us, there's a bit of perspective lost. So we'll be around for a bit. And I can't say much more after that, but I hope we're there and that the Green Party comes back to its roots after what is inevitably going to be a difficult period for a lot of members in government, members like myself.
Well, perfect, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for taking time out today to talk to me.
Cheers. Thanks, Odhrán.